Good morning, everyone. We have a wonderful panel with you. I'm going to ask each of our panelists, starting with Matt Wells, to introduce themselves. We have Todd McLees as well as Tom Dakich. My name is Gordon Gill. I'm the design partner for Adrian Smith with Gordon Gill Architecture here in Chicago. We're an international firm that focuses on city planning, architectural design, interior design, but with a strong focus on carbon and energy in our practice. We're very interested in continuing the conversation that we just heard about what our region holds as assets. And I'll just ask Matt, Todd, and Tom to introduce themselves. Matt?
Thank you, Gordon, and good morning. Just really pleased to be here on this last day of what's been a fantastic summit. Major kudos to Mark and to Tweed Thornton and the board of the Alliance for Regional Development. I'm the Director of External Engagement and Partnerships here at Purdue University Northwest, where I work closely with our Chancellor, Tom Keon, who spoke yesterday, on a number of initiatives related to economic and community engagement and development of the Northwest Indiana and South Chicago region. So happy to be here.
Great. Tom?
My name is Tom Dakich. I'm actually the managing director of the Digital Crossroads of America Data Center, which is over in Hammond. I've been an attorney for 30 some odd years. What our drive here is to create a large, secure, quantum-ready corridor of fiber optic with the best optics and the most security possible. And I'm anxious to explain it better.
Great. Todd?
Thanks, Gordon. Good morning, everybody. My name is Todd McLees. I'm a partner at the Innovation Outpost, which is based in Texas, but it's an ecosystem, a learning ecosystem, looking to make a minimum of $100 million of workforce impact every 12 months, with the vast majority of that achieved through changing the trajectory for people from underserved communities. We do that through programming focused on non-degree-based programming for digital and human skills. And in each innovation outpost, like in Amarillo, Texas, where they have successfully closed the equity gap as it relates to learning outcomes, we are also a significant partner to industry players in that region, as well as economic development.
Great. Well, on this session, I think we very much want to have a conversation about the Greater South Shore and that connectivity that we talked about along the southern region and all the way up to our friends in Milwaukee on Wisconsin on the west side. Matt, would you like to start us off, or would you like to tee up the conversation?
I'd be happy to. Well, first off, I think the discussion this morning, I'm hoping that we can share a broad perspective about an initiative that could be truly transformational for the entire southern shore of Lake Michigan, and really, in a lot of ways, augment what is already a very substantial center of economic gravity. This Chicago centric mega region, as we're fond of calling it through the Alliance. The initiative that I'd like for us to talk a lot about this morning is affectionately known as the Greater South Shore Initiative. This is a master development planning process that's been underway now for just over about 6 months, and was made possible through an initial grant from the Mansueto Foundation. The initiative is chaired here at Purdue Northwest, but is comprised of a steering committee of numerous leaders from across the 90-mile corridor from Chicago into South Bend, including the metropolitan planning organizations, CMAP, NERPC, and MACOG, several economic development organizations such as the Northwest Indiana Forum, One Region, the South Bend Elkhart Regional Partnership, with some growing input from some organizations in Chicago, including the Chicago Quantum Exchange. And really the bottom line goal of this initiative is to adaptively reuse the enormous assets of the 90-mile corridor from Chicago to South Bend, which have historically been a center of manufacturing gravity for the last century plus, making much of the world's steel, the BP oil refinery and in Whiting, major investments that have been made because of our location and because of our infrastructure here. What this initiative is seeking to do is to position that same collection of infrastructure assets, but for 21st century uses. So to convert an area of legacy conventional manufacturing to a new hyper-connected corridor where new applications of our abundant supply of fresh water, our hyper connectivity by road, by rail, and then now also by fiber, and Tom Dakich is going to talk more about that, can be knitted together in a way to stimulate new kinds of economic development, higher wage jobs, cleaner, greener manufacturing processes, and higher tech industries in an area that has been in transition now for many years as the domestic steel industry has evolved since its high water mark in the middle of the 20th century. So, and I'm also thrilled to have Todd McLees, who's a longtime friend and a colleague, co-conspirator on a number of fronts with us to talk about the significance of the human infrastructure and the human capital needed for a master development plan of this scale, of this ambition to come to fruition, because the assets themselves can only be valuable if there's human capital to pair with them. So, I think the group that we have here today, is just a collection of thought leaders that really has set in motion something that I believe can become a model for the entire United States if it's done well. So hopefully that gives the broad overview. And Gordon, I'll pass the mic back over to you to perhaps elaborate further on Smith and Gill's involvement in this.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. When we first started this conversation, it's really a kind of continuum of some of the work that we've done in Chicago since 2008 on the kind of city plan and looking at carbon and looking at energy as a platform for infrastructure. I think there are a couple observations that I'd like to make today. And first is kind of the continuing the momentum of the last session where Michael kind of identified that the number one priority for this region, he believes, is in quantum computing. I'd like to expand that to include quantum communications as kind of the first step towards quantum computing. And I think that, when we think about the future of our region and we think about the future of our United States, we know that this technology is foremost in all of our minds. And without it, it's our opinion that we would be kind of operating in a cloud of obsolescence if we weren't pursuing this as an integrated platform for planning in the future. So for us, really looking at infrastructure as the driving force for policy and not the other way around. We believe that technology is currently now available to us where we can improve a quality of life, improve the economic status of current assets that we have in the region, including all of those that you just mentioned, Matt, and really focus on people as the greatest asset that we can move forward in terms of education and kind of advancing that intellectual asset that we have in our country and in this region. We've done a lot of work and continue to work with you on the idea of looking at the right of ways and looking at fiber, and then how do we translate that into a kind of feasible economic quality of life for people in the region? Why would that make sense? And when we think about clean energy, when we think about zero emissions, when we think about the Great Lakes system and the land and assets that we have in this region along the 90-mile strip from Indiana to Milwaukee, or 150-mile strip, we have identified this not just in isolation, but with a host of professionals as one of the greatest economic assets that we could possibly pursue in our country. We believe that this project would really serve as a great example for a host of things as a leader in our country for both energy, sustainability, economics, and education. I know that Todd is going to talk about that quite a bit. And I think that the Greater South Shore Initiative is one of those moments in time where it has come to be a very practical, realistic, and doable solution. We think that this is at the doorstep for all of us. I love the fact that we have leadership that is looking across the boundaries and looking at pluralistic solutions instead of looking at these issues in isolation. I think that kind of cooperation and that kind of leadership is what this country needs. So we're thrilled to be a part of it from a planning standpoint, architectural standpoint. And I'd be happy to have Tom talk a little bit more about his initiatives in the region and what he sees as the future for the region. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about your work?
In one of our prep sessions for this, Gordon, you brought up the comment that any development or any community that's not thinking about quantum issues, quantum computing, quantum networking, quantum communications is really designing something for that's going to be obsolete relatively soon.
Yeah.
So to set and that really kind of that was just a brilliant way to look at it for these subjects today. Any community that underestimates the magnitude of computing power that's about to become relatively available, and it's 10 years out, plus más o menos, but that's coming, is being short-sighted. And I'm unabashedly a Hoosier. I've lived in Indiana for most of my adult life, and lived in Northwest Indiana for a bunch of it. But as being I'm a Chicagoan because I'm part of the MSA of Chicago, we pay a lot of attention in Indiana to what's going on in Chicago and the politics in Chicago and the Cubs and everything else. But at the end of the day, there's so much innovation and so much drive in the city of Chicago that makes it possible for schools like Notre Dame and Purdue and Indiana-based schools to add a value to Chicago. And this is the next thought. Quantum networking, quantum corridors, making quantum networks available is important to our ability, our collective ability here in the South Shore to we just have to do this. If we don't do this, somebody else will. New Mexico the other day announced that they were going to do a quantum initiative, and we're ahead of them because we at least understand their whole presentation. Would be critical of New Mexico here for a second, but their whole presentation didn't understand that quantum computing doesn't today exist. That what we're looking for is the researchers of quantum computing, the people who are spending federal dollars and private dollars to develop it. So Chicago is the home for so much of that. I think there's 2 of the top 5 network research facilities in the United States are in the Chicagoland. And what we're doing here at Digital Crossroad is expanding that and making it such that there's going to be a network that's going to run through from Chicago all the way through the state of Indiana, and include South Bend and those places where there's a lot of learning going on. And one more thing, Scott Goodman, who many of you know is the CEO of Decennial Group and of Farpoint Development. When he recently became involved in our project and he became a partner of ours in this, everything kicked up. Our professionalism kicked up, our ability to see the future kicked up, the resources kicked up. So our tie into Chicago is greater than it's ever been. In Indiana we want to be part of it, and developing a quantum network and a quantum corridor is our next task here at the Digital Crossroads.
That's great. I just want to throw a couple of things out there as we continue the conversation, Matt and Todd, regarding the kind of backbone that we talk about in terms of data and digital platforms, and really thinking about, the idea of circular economies where we minimize waste and maximize potential of mutual potential. I want to make sure that we explain that when we talk about a corridor, that is really the kind of beginning of what we think is a much larger network that would serve the entire region and ultimately the entire country. And Tom is right. There are projects that are ongoing, but not at the scale and not across the boundaries that we see possible here. Of course, all of this is really for us to look at the future of people and talk about equitable investment in people and communities as we move forward. And I know Todd is very focused on that subject. Todd, would you want to talk to us a little bit about your work and what you see as the future for this region?
Sure. Thanks, Gordon. I think what I want to do first is just sort of introduce the thought that, building on what you just said, Gordon, that one of the elements, maybe barriers or limiting factors that's quickly dissipating or perhaps is gone, is geography. We can speak about improving regions in a 90-mile corridor and so forth, but there is, from the last session, there is a particular term in the water center's formal title, which is the Global Water Center. I live about 1.5 miles. I live in Milwaukee, and I'm born and raised here, and keep coming back home no matter where jobs take me. I live about 1.5 miles from the Global Water Center, and I know that we are regularly seeing people coming in from various continents to visit. And so when I think about what Michael shared about the quantum accelerators, the facilities, the research centers that are there, the research center at the UW-Madison, the Connected Systems Institute at UW-Milwaukee. In addition to working in Texas, I work closely with the 18 institutions, 2-year, 4-year public-private in southeastern Wisconsin in a network called the Higher Education Regional Alliance. There are tremendous assets. The Gateway Technical Colleges, Integrated Manufacturing, Engineering, and Technology Center, UW Parkside Smart City Center that they're just spinning up. The best way, what we have found with the Innovation Outpost, working from an epicenter in Amarillo, Texas, not Austin, not Dallas, but Amarillo, 250,000 people, the best way to make regional impact is by thinking about projects at scale. Our instructor right now for a particular cohort that we're running to upskill 15 people from underserved communities in digital skills is from Miami-Dade, and he's with us a couple hours a day. He's a distinguished professor. It's access to the best resources we can find, not the best resources we can find in Amarillo. And so there are incredible opportunities to build loosely connected networks with shared values, shared visions, find those change makers, as Michael and Paul and Greg were talking about in the last session, and actually making real tangible impact. From my perspective, as Matt set up quite nicely, if we're not lifting people up, and to Gordon's point, if we're not working towards circular economies, I'm not sure why we would invest, what the driving factor is to invest in all of the infrastructure. But if we can build infrastructure with equitability in mind, and we can build infrastructure with lifelong learning, I think, we spend an awful lot of time. We have tremendous universities and colleges in this mega region, unbelievable access to young talent. We have another challenge in front of us, which is mid-career professionals that will likely have to change jobs in the near future. And not just unskilled labor, but people working in HR and finance and customer-facing roles that cognitive technology will have something to say about how their role will evolve. By 2025, not too long from now, and certainly before the advent of quantum ends, or produces fruit for the region. So I think the focus on long-term vision is incredibly important. I think we have to have a wide lens when we're thinking about how to prioritize and balance near-term and long-term objectives. And most importantly, a global lens, the global, national for sure, but a global lens with the thought being that that's the best, most effective way to strengthen the very region that we all call home. Last night I was involved in a session where I facilitated a session for 2.5 hours with the UN. And we had people from every continent. Taizo Son, who's the only slightly less successful brother of Masayoshi Son from SoftBank, and only slightly less, looking to change the way we think about education and in terms of lifelong learning, but actually making significant investments to achieve that and to help systematic change occur. It was a fascinating conversation with people from, again, every continent was represented on that call for 2.5 hours. And so it's that sort of mindset, I think, that can help us really understand where we can be making effective investments and having the most impact in this region.
Todd, you bring up a globalization question in a globalization way. Well, think about it and maybe think about things in a different way, which is, if you were to draw this, if you were to take the landmass of the United States today and just say, we're going to redraw the states, the whole way that we would operate as a country would be entirely different. I mean, the state, everything would look different than it does today. The lines that we deal with, between our different municipalities, between different states, were drawn literally 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 150 years ago. Well, they don't apply to today. So why should we be beholden to those issues? Why should Wisconsin have a different perspective than Minnesota? It's almost a flaw in the Constitution that we're stuck with these state lines. But I think it creates a way that we can use those things to foster better solutions that make more people, include more people that otherwise wouldn't be included.
Just a couple notes on that, Tom. And this is the opportunity that technology affords us, right? We're somewhat boundaryless in terms of the platforms that we seek, and environmental issues are certainly boundaryless. If we could only get policy and politics to be boundaryless, we'd be in great shape. I just want to take a step back, because there are a couple of questions in the chat, since our enthusiasm drove us right into the conversation about quantum computing. Tom, could you take a step back and just describe, in your words, what you think it is? We also posted the MIT, an MIT post that Matt sent across in the chat for everyone. But could you take a minute and just describe what exactly is quantum computing in your words?
It's a concept on dragging different methods and different ways to make computational problems answerable. Not necessarily to answer them, but to make them answerable. Calculations performed in different ways from different perspectives is quantum. It's not linear. It's not just one perspective on each question. Or each computational question. It's calculations performed from different perspectives, and the idea is that there's nuances to this that quite honestly over my little law education, but the idea is don't limit the way that problems are approached and the way that problems are solved, but expand on that and make one method of solving the question feed off the other one.
We had a great thanks for that. We had a great conversation with the Chicago Quantum Exchange as it relates to the platforms, and some of the conversations we had we're really, as you said, Tom, looking at quantum computing as no longer a kind of a binary approach to problem solving, but much more of a kind of organic approach, almost, in the way that you can divorce the links and then open up the system to really create a much higher speed of calculation. And I think one of the things that we've learned about it so far is that, right now we see a real pursuit in terms of pursuing bigger and stronger and kind of more powerful computing. But what we understand about that is it's still binary. So what we're doing is we're really trying to make it bigger so we can do the binary calculation faster. And in fact, that's actually not what quantum computing is. It's a much different approach. And I see Todd's got his hand up. I want to add a couple of things that Todd mentioned in terms of life cycle and thinking about problem solving in a life cycle fashion for the region, and not just thinking about it in that linear process. It's not just the quantum computing that needs to be thought of as being pluralistic. It's every aspect of the interrelationships that we have in systems. So what is the relationship between the built environment and infrastructure, then the water sources that we have, people and the built environment, programs and the education? It is really what we're pursuing here is a very holistic approach to creating communities for people. And the quantum computing is the backbone of it, because we understand that from a data standpoint. But ultimately, what we're looking at here is a life cycle economy that is improving the quality of lives for people in the region and hopefully people in the country. Todd, did you want to elaborate on?
Well, I sure can't elaborate on quantum, certainly no further than you and Tom took us. But I do want to give one little piece of background, which is, as we are so focused today on industries, and I'll use manufacturing in this region as an example, and the digital transformation of those industries, especially the challenges facing small and medium-sized manufacturers, it is probably important to understand that we are coming upon the end of the digital era. And that is not to say that there won't be any more digital computing or digital processes, because of course the industry continued after the industrial era ended. But the digital era goes back to around 1950, and because of Moore's law, we've seen digital technologies double in power every 12 to 24 months, depending on when you look at the curve. And it's resulted in these exponential changes. And now there are new forms of computing between cognitive, neuromorphic, which is compute designed to think like the human brain does, or to compute like the human brain does, and quantum. And quantum seems to be gaining the most traction and representing the greatest opportunity. But what's important to understand is we're exiting this era known as the digital era that really began in earnest in 1970 with the microprocessor. And it's a paradigm shift. And what I'm hearing from Gordon and Matt and Tom is that there's an opportunity, because, if you ask Tom or anybody else 10 years from now what quantum is, we'll all have a better understanding of what it is and where the opportunities lie and so forth. What I'm hearing this morning is, let's get out in front of this, because we have these amazing assets that are focused on quantum. Let's take advantage of that and build an economic opportunity around it.
Yeah, Todd, it's funny. We started our firm in 2006, and we have we're going into our 15th year, and we have a chart that plots innovation since the beginning of our firm. And this thing that I have in my hand here actually was released in 2007. So when we started the firm, we didn't even have one of these. And it's almost impossible to think about it today, functioning with an iPhone or something like that in your hand. I think that one of the points I'd like to add to the conversation is, from a regional standpoint, when we do or comment on things like national infrastructure, and we think about resilience of cities, I know it might be, I just want to go out there a little bit and talk about the environment and come back for a second. The Midwest, and particularly the greater South Shore that we were referring to, is extremely well protected from natural disaster. And we don't have, the kind of flooding and threats that we may have in other parts of the country on the coastal regions. And so when we think about looking forward, and part of the quantum computing conversation that's, been on the periphery, and I know it's probably foremost in others' minds, are things like national security and those kinds of aspects. And the idea of having this platform in this region, and maybe Matt can elaborate on this, is not only just important from a cultural standpoint, from a people standpoint, it's important from an international and global standpoint. And I do think that when we talk about the Greater South Shore and we look at what Indiana and the business of the states that surround the Great Lakes have to offer, if you were to run the equation around economy kind of around the Great Lakes system into Canada and back, you're looking at an equation that's somewhere around 4.6 billion US dollars in terms of GDP. It's kind of the equivalent of the European Union. And that is a fascinating and significant understanding to have. We are speaking today specifically about the Greater South Shore. We're speaking specifically about, Indiana, there you go, Illinois, Wisconsin, even over to Ohio. But really what we're suggesting here is that there is an opportunity for all of us to kind of focus on beginning a platform and establishing a platform for the people of this region that is much larger in its potential than just the region. And I want to make sure that we're more inclusive than we are exclusive, and that we understand that this is just the beginning of a conversation, and that it's not about creating a corridor with blinders on it. It's the complete opposite. It's really creating a platform that is an open concept for the entire nation. Matt, did you want to talk about that or elaborate?
No, that's great. I think that's a great segue, Gordon. And I think this is a very significant moment in world history, for all kinds of obvious reasons, but some that are perhaps less obvious. I think what we're seeing right now, particularly over the last 18 months, that, the pandemic has been an accelerant of existing trends that were already shifting the ground and landscape underneath nearly every industry, every community, every nation state in the world, because of the exponential rate of change in technological innovation. I've had an opportunity to work very closely on what was originally called the Endless Frontier Act, was passed in the Senate as the Innovation and Competition Act, and pieces of that are now being added on to the infrastructure bill and the soft infrastructure bill through reconciliation. And what I think is very significant about the moment in time that we occupy is that there's this growing consensus and awareness, broadly with bipartisan support, I think, both at the federal level and we see here even within our multi-state region, of the interplay between hard infrastructure and perhaps the most significant piece of hard infrastructure for the next epoch is digital. Well, I guess is technological infrastructure, because again, as Todd aptly pointed out, we're moving beyond traditional binary into quantum communications, quantum physics. But the relationship between the ability to move people and data efficiently and securely, to cross-pollinate and to synergize ideas that stimulate new innovation. I think we're starting to see that, and I'm optimistic that if significant federal support is coming downstream, we have a moment to kind of re-architect the economy of the Midwest here, and I think that's thrilling and sobering in a lot of ways because of the challenges that we're looking at, from the disruption to the supply chain, things that we've been hearing about all week through the summit. the importance of data security, cybersecurity, from both a commercial standpoint, but also from a national security standpoint. I'm extraordinarily bullish on the Midwest, and particularly this part of the Great Lakes region from Milwaukee into northern Indiana, as having enormous value to offer at the midpoint, or I should say the meeting point of technological innovation and infrastructure. And Gordon, I know that you all have been also paying a lot of attention to both of those bills, the conventional infrastructure bill as well as the innovation bill, and it's significant. I mean, and I think I mentioned this maybe on Monday on the economy day, but we simply do not have the population size to compete on quantity of human capital. So what that means is, we have to, as a society, invest in the quality of our human capital, and the work that Todd is doing, I think, is phenomenal, to try to, empower and resource historically underinvested, underserved communities, because our level of innovation and productivity per capita has to outpace much larger parts of the world, simply because we don't have the bodies. And certainly the domestic birth rate in the United States has not been trending upward for much of the last 20 years. So, what that means is, we have to make more of what we have. And I think we're generally pretty good at doing that in our part of the world here in the Great Lakes. So.
We are not a coast, right? We're the Greater South Shore Initiative, formed by or funded by Joe Mansueto, who grew up in Munster and has had an unbelievable amount of success. And having people like Scott Goodman, who I'm sure a lot of people here know, it get involved in making this an area that's going to be able to compete with the coasts is exciting. But we're not one of the coasts. We have to do things better. We have to. We're Chicago. We're the Midwest. If we don't do things better, then we're going to get overlooked. It's just. I'm sorry, but I mean, people can argue it, but that's the reality. One of the things that's annoying everybody around the world is cybersecurity. How do you put security into your network? How do you drive more confidence in what you've got, and then won't end up in somebody else's hands? Well, so the whole world is engaged in this cat and mouse game, right? I mean, we developed something as being on the developer side, and then the hacker side, or whatever whatever the politics of that are, they go off and they try to solve it, and then they solve it. So we have to get a new way to get around it and all that. One of the things that why we love the idea of a quantum network, a quantum corridor, is to maybe, dreaming here a little bit, but maybe stop the cat and mouse aspect of security. Maybe we can figure out a way, and I think there's some people here that are way down the road of keeping the network entirely intact without there being breaches, without there being the leaps and bounds better. I think there's a element of security in quantum computing that we in the Midwest just have, in the Greater South Shore Initiative, we just have to be on the forefront of that. It could be a heck of a mark that we're making on the world.
To piggyback off of that briefly, Tom, I love that concept of getting out of the cat and mouse game. And, I've reflected on this quite a bit as we've been working on this particular initiative, that, too often I think communities and regions and states and, look to play catch up to someone else that's doing something that we want to do. The problem with that is that if we try to play catch up, that area is already moving on to their next thing. And by the time we get to where they are, there's somebody else, there's somewhere else entirely. So, I think what's really significant about this initiative, about, the minds that are working on it, and I'll pull up the slide here in a moment about the project team, which is phenomenal. It's seeking to anticipate not where we should have gone 20 years ago, but where we need to be in 20 to 50 years. And in a way that leverages what we have in this particular footprint, the human capital, the infrastructure, the intellectual capital, the resources that we have, how to knit together what are essentially fragmented assets. I mean, if you drew a line connecting all of the Big Ten and private Big Ten conference, the Notre Dames of the world, research institutions from the Twin Cities all the way into Indiana and then eventually into Ohio, you'd have a collection of research and development firepower that would be unrivaled anywhere in the world. If we can truly set in motion an infrastructure and development planning process that knits all of those things together by transit and connectivity, I think the potential is really, it's hard to overstate how significant that is. So
could I just chime in on that? I don't want to be overly overly dramatic, but I don't think I think it's something we have to do. I know that, when I listen to Todd and I listen to Tom, and one of the reasons I think we're all on this team together and talking about this is because we all believe that this is it's not a question of if it should be done or, when it should be done. I think we've all kind of understood through our own work independently, through speaking together and working together, that this is something that has to happen. If we are not willing to look at this in a pluralistic manner, to cross the boundaries, to get rid of the silos, if we're not interested in really looking forward for the region and the people in this region and the country, then I would just repeat that we are destined to be obsolete. And it is going to happen. It has to happen. And it's really, I think the project for me personally is almost like a call to arms. And I love the idea of, looking at or retooling the Midwest economy, really adapting to our future and playing leapfrog instead of playing catch up. I know I would ask Tom and Todd if we have any other remarks that they'd love to make. I know we're pressing into our maybe 40th minute, and maybe if we had some remarks from Todd and Tom, we could open it up to see if there are any questions that are out there. I'm watching the chat room closely. And thanks, Ty Warner, for your question about what is quantum computing, or asking us to explain that. We appreciate that. Todd or Tom, is there anything you'd like to add or close out?
I could be really quick about this. Wayne Gretzky said, somebody asked Wayne Gretzky why he was so good at hockey. And he said, I go to where the puck's going, not where it's been. So we're the Midwest, we have to be better. We just do. We can delude ourselves about, that there's all this, that we can be the same as everybody else, but we have to follow Wayne Gretzky. We have to go where the puck's going. And our effort to build a quantum network, the quantum corridor, it's not the end result. The end result is to build it and then have people use it to do things, to bring ideas and bring people and bring resources here that wouldn't otherwise come.
I would just add that in the midst of technological paradigm shifts and other disruptions that we've all experienced over the last 18 plus months, the puck might not be round when we get there. It's the game is changing drastically. And to Gordon's point, and I suppose in the previous session as well, there's urgency here to find the people who are able to come together to make real impact. My attitude on this has changed significantly over the last 18 months or so. Being involved with one small community college who has successfully changed the game in their region by offering support services, taking food security, childcare, and transportation off the table, and seeing $16 for every dollar they spent on those services in retained tuition revenue, and seeing their completion rate going from 9 to 54% is something to behold. Because this is an infrastructure conversation, maybe this is an apt analogy. We see the future of learning as 3 lanes, a 3-lane highway, if you will. The first lane we might think of as the slow lane is the legacy lane. And we can all agree that we have incredible 2-year and 4-year universities and colleges to leverage in this region, and we will continue to do so. And they are changing too, right? But we all know those stories, and there are some incredible change agents working there. PNW is a great example of that. The second lane is around non-degree based programming, where the opportunity is to help people across a spectrum of needs, whether they're from underserved communities or some of the people on this call who will need a different career 7 years from now because of obsolescence of their role, displacement, et cetera. And we need to build the engine in the Midwest that is capable of quickly reskilling and upskilling people, which is flexible and scalable enough to do so while we continue to earn, while we continue to work. And the third piece is our unique opportunity for our generations. That third lane, you might think of that as the autonomous lane. And the autonomous lane is not just about digital, self-paced learning. It's also about the unique opportunity of intergenerational learning. This is the first time in human history where we can look at an incredible rate of change resulting in paradigm shifts more frequently than ever, combined with human longevity. 200 years ago, human longevity, when steam was introduced, was 37 years of age. So while if I were born in 1800, I may have seen the industrialization of the economy, I may have seen the steam power change, the textile industry, but I didn't learn about it from my grandparents, and I didn't teach my grandchildren. And when the assembly line and electrification and the gas combustion engine occurred, life expectancy was only 51, so very much the same dynamics. Today, my 11-year-old daughter has a 1 in 3 chance to see 100 years of age. And the lessons that she will be able to learn from generations before her and after her is a fundamental shift. And so in the Midwest, we have an opportunity, because of how we're wired, to build systems that allow for traditional education to thrive, for that middle lane of non-degree based programming, preferably, frankly, delivered by parallel efforts from higher institutions of higher education. This is where I spend my time with Innovation Outpost, bringing industry and those institutions together. And then that third lane of intergenerational learning really happens within industry with just the interchange of information. That, combined with what we're talking about from advancements in technology, a new focus on particular parts of our region, removing the false barriers of geography, having a pluralistic approach to this. These are incredible systems where the opportunity lies.
Fantastic. Well said, Todd. Thank you. I noticed that Greg Hummel had his hand. Greg, did you have your hand up? Were you looking to? I think we're more than happy to engage in conversation and questions at this point. I don't want to not do that.
Well, it's going to be hard to follow, Todd. that was a stem winder. And what I loved about it is that it does have a sociological dimension to it and how we organize society. And we really do perceive these fundamental shifts in ways that can be more cohesive and integrated. And so I'll give an example. I was privileged to hear Mayor Biss in Evanston. He has that degree from MIT, and I feel a kinship with him because he's a musician and a politician. I may not be a politician, but I'm a musician, as is Matt. And the point that he was making about that non-degree track set of folks, Governor Pritzker enacted, we have to replace all the lead piping in 35 years. That is going to make room for a huge number of plumbers. And, can we do that on an integrated way? Yesterday, Tommy Thompson talked about using our prison population as a resource as opposed to a drag in terms of vocational schools there. So what I'm hearing coming through this panel, maybe more so than any of the other panels, kudos to you guys, is that this is the whole gestalt. We are looking at a much broader worldview, and we also are doing a better job, all of you, in terms of identifying strengths that frankly are hiding in plain sight. We just have to realize it. Now, I'm going to put on the hat that I'm used to wearing, which is sort of team captain in the legal and financial world. And my questions are two. Who are the key industry champions that need to be brought to the table? I learned this from Haven Allen. I mentioned that in the last session. That then, and it's a tight circle that becomes a wider circle as we widen it out. But who do we invite to the table first in industry? And then who are the key capitalists? You've already got one capitalist. There's lots of billionaires in the Midwest. Can we unlock that philanthropic capital in service of economic activity? And so that becomes our angel network. The key industry leaders become the basis on which detailed business planning can occur, and academic cohorts and government cohorts can join that. In a very grand sense, it's a large public-private partnership. But the key to this is how you lay it out. And I guess I'll focus the question back to Gordon, because as I run the Chicago Central Area Committee, one of the things that struck me is that the huge skill sets that lie with studio groups that do planning. You guys know how to organize people to get to results. And so I have a hunch it has to be around some specifics that then create the momentum to do more. But I'd like to know how we put, to use my musical background, how do we put the band together on this in an informed way that drives the outcome that we want?
Yeah, I'm going to ask the full team to respond to this, because I know we've had this conversation with Matt, Tom, and now we're having it with Todd. And what we're seeing is that when we engage groups, Greg, such as the Quantum Exchange, they are now reaching out to literally thousands of industries that are interested in investing and creating these platforms in the country. They simply need the physical opportunity to do it. So I'm going to ask Matt and Tom and Todd to chime in, because I know Matt is chomping at the bit there.
You're absolutely right, Gordon. I thought a lot about this stuff. And Greg, it's a great question. And I think, what we're seeing is that because of the nature of this type of development planning and the types of industries that we're seeking to catalyze here, there's a fusion here of both economic opportunity and social impact. And that's a real sweet spot, I think, for this particular moment in our history. We have identified, in fact, let me see if I can find the slide here. One moment. There we are. I'm going to share my screen. Specific industry clusters, for this mega region that we believe and have, vetted with numerous subject matter experts and have compiled data from numerous sources, that this area is well positioned to supply. Everybody has been talking now for months about, the just nearly catastrophic disruption in numerous mission critical supply chains. Semiconductors may be at the top of that list. The state of Indiana is making a big push. I know Illinois is as well. I mean, everyone is looking at this as a significant opportunity to reshore production of microchips because of our dependence on too few sources abroad. We think obviously our proximal location at the crossroads of America make this area primed for electric and autonomous vehicle research and development and production. So certainly working with the Elon Musks, the Teslas of the world. But what's interesting too, with the quantum communications technology, there's an enormous leg there for secure communication. So not only exponentially expanded computing power, but the security of quantum communications, because the little packets of light are always in flux that can't be easily hacked. Crypto and payment technology, fintech. Chicago is one of the great financial centers of the world. There's some real, I think, conceptual validity to the notion of this corridor also supplying opportunities for new ventures and new investment in fintech and digital payment technology, which is an area we have a lot of catch up to play as well. So from an industry standpoint, I think those are some that need to be at or near the very top of the list in terms of engagement strategy. In terms of early money for projects like this, of this scope and of this ambition, we are very fortunate to have numerous philanthropic foundations and individuals in our geographic footprint that are already in varying stages of engagement. Of course, we're very grateful to Mr. Mansueto for getting this whole project off the ground. But we're fortunate to have good relationships with the Knight Foundation, the Anderson Foundation. Here in our backyard in Northwest Indiana, we have the Dean and Barbara White Family Foundation, which is doing some phenomenal work to redevelop this part of the state. So I think it's going to require a broad coalition. But I was encouraged to hear that Todd is working with Taizo-san. SoftBank is another entity that has been spending a lot of their bandwidth and resources on new types of investments that both address social equity and technological progress. So I'm getting long-winded. I'm going to shut up and punt it to somebody else, but hopefully that's a good tee up.
Well, I'll take that bait. First of all, I don't know enough about it, but I think the region's about to get significantly stronger in semiconductors. So I'm happy to talk about that offline with you, Greg. Let me take a slightly different approach to this. I'll give you an example. I was looking for mentors for 15 people in Texas for a live cohort that's going on right now. And I reached out to 2 people not in the region. I had some local mentors already lined up. I reached out to a person named Rupali Thacker, and she used to work in learning and development at Amazon AWS, and this happens to be an AWS cohort. And now she's in learning and development in a senior role at Facebook. And then I reached out to a new friend, Kim Blue, who's Vice President of Human Resources for Zoom. And all I said was, I'm looking for some mentors, preferably diverse, but both from an ethnic and a gender perspective. And 3 days later, I had 180 emails in my inbox for 15 people. I needed 2. So last night, we hosted Taizo Son and Daniel Goldman, who was the senior developer on SimCity, for those of you old enough to, I certainly am, remember that. And he sold a couple of company to Electronic Arts and lives in Japan now and so forth. And he's involved with Taizo. This morning, I got 3 emails from superintendents, college president, and somebody from industry saying, hey, thank you so much for last night. I have a Zoom set up with Taizo, who's, his net worth is $3 billion, and he's invested in 180 companies in the last 6 years and so forth. So the impact that somebody in Seattle and somebody in Atlanta had for us in mentors in Amarillo, 250,000 people, was immediate and scalable. The impact of a global event last night directly benefited people in Chicago and Milwaukee. And so the opportunity here is, yes, let's go talk with every industry partner that we need to talk to. Yes, let's build a framework because, for the Higher Education Regional Alliance in Wisconsin, we immediately attracted 53 employers because it's a workforce initiative, right? Some of whom were ready to go, some of whom represented friction. So I think we have to have frameworks in place to say who are the right candidates, who are the people that we should start with, and then grow that sphere of influence. And then who should we be talking to? We live at a time, this is my last point because now I'm long-winded. We live at a time when we grew up, 95% of us were educated and worked where we were born. Today, that's under 50%. It's closer to 40%. And it's a global environment. And so we should be trying to figure out how we can get people to graduate from our wonderful universities, work remotely for other companies, grow their skills, and then raise their family in our regions. But the remote work revolution is something we have to factor in here too. We have got to create new strategies, not just quantum, but new human strategies, new people-focused strategies that will put us where we need to be a decade from now.
So I know we're coming close to our time mark, but I do want to recognize a question that was in the Q&A for a little bit here from Leighton Olson. And the question is really, it says, how might regional skill and career exploration networks anchored in community college hub and K through 12 areas assist in retooling the Midwest, including bringing visibility to Biennial International Manufacturing Technology Show at McCormick Place, September 20th, 2022. I know Todd, this is kind of some of your, right?
Yeah, I won't be long, but community colleges represent an incredible opportunity. We happen to be the beneficiaries of an unsolicited gift from Mackenzie Scott. We received $15 million, which has been incredibly helpful. But at the moment, there's so much money in the system in federal grants and so forth. Nobody is paying a penny to participate in the skills development right now. In fact, they're receiving $2,500 stipends in addition to the other support services that I mentioned. So Leighton, I appreciate the spirit of the question. We should be leveraging our two-year schools much more effectively, as well as our R1s, our research universities, in order to take a look 10 years down the road. But in terms of the absolute immediate need, we have a tremendous opportunity to activate something like Innovation Outposts at the community colleges, where we're used to dealing with a wide spectrum of capabilities and a wide spectrum of life circumstances and helping people find meaningful work. The career exploration piece is really just, can we in the Midwest begin to view K through 12 as a K to gray continuum? Can we redesign the end of high school experience so that not everybody's expected to go to a four-year institution? It's this whole piece. Exploration can start in the early stages of K through 12. So I think we begin to treat the system as one continuum from early education to workforce development, and make sure that everybody's aligned with what our strategies are.
Maybe my final comment, Gordon, would be, I firmly believe that government is here to incent and to de-incent things. Public-private partnerships are just vital to what we're doing. The Build Back Better program is a good example of something that's going to spur innovation. I also believe that government money is better spent by the private sector than it is by government. We do a better job of understanding where money should be spent and where it should be allocated. And so the alternative education ways, that's kind of exciting stuff. The Build Back Better thing is fantastic. The Aspen Institute has been a part of what Matt's drive to make us better across the Greater South Shore. And so private-public partnerships are burgeoning, are just vital to what we're doing.
That's great. That's fantastic. I know we're running out of time. I just want to make sure that I acknowledge Tom Dakich, Todd McLees, and Matt Wells for participating. Thanks so much, guys. And I want to make sure we thank Mark Hopkins, Greg Hummel, and I also want to thank Tweed Thornton, who you don't see on the stream, but he helped coordinate all this stuff and made it virtually possible. So that's I think our conversation for today. But Mark and Greg, if there's any closing remarks or anything else you'd like us to touch on, we'd be happy to do it. But thanks for having us today.
Oh, it was absolutely our pleasure. What a great conversation. It kind of honestly sums up the natural threads that were occurring during the week. Really, it was a wonderful, wonderful panel.